The live TV studio was more than just a room tonight. It was an arena. Bright LED panels poured an unforgiving white blaze onto the polished mirror-like desk, making even the smallest movement impossible to hide. Cameras hung from sweeping cranes, their silent glide tracking every gesture, every twitch of an eyebrow. Stage lights burned overhead, hot and relentless, stripping away every shadow. There was no place to hide here. The audience was packed, shoulder to shoulder, every seat claimed long before the show began. Men in suits, women clutching programs, a few veterans in uniform, each face turned toward the stage, eyes locked on the two empty chairs in the center. The hum of whispered conversations mixed with the faint hiss of the lights, creating a kind of electric anticipation. Everyone here knew something was about to happen, something that might be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. Then they walked in. From the left wing, Congresswoman Jasmine appeared calm, measured every step deliberate. Her deep blue suit was flawless, the sharp lines of her jacket catching the light. A small scales of justice pin rested on her lapel, a quiet signal of her purpose. Her eyes scanned the room, steady and unblinking, the kind of gaze that told you she had come prepared for more than just talking points. From the right, Bongino entered with a different kind of energy, broad-shouldered forward, leaning his stride, quick and confident. His smile was thin, edged with the kind of challenge that said he'd already decided he would win. As he took his seat, his posture radiated impatience, like a fighter itching for the bell to ring. The contrast was impossible to miss. Calm against restless, precision against force. Two people, two worlds about to collide under the hottest lights in America. And in that moment, every single person in the room knew they weren't here just to discuss policy. They were here to clash. The host straightened his note cards, his voice calm but carrying weight. Tonight's question, he began letting the pause stretch just enough to draw every eye. Who truly protects the law? The words hung in the air like a challenge. Bongino leaned forward, seizing the moment before anyone else could speak. His tone sharpened each word, landing heavy. "Let's be real," he said, pointing a finger across the desk. Some people pretend to stand for justice while defending criminals and undermining law enforcement. The hit was direct, personal. Gasps rippled through the crowd. From the right side of the studio came sharp claps and cheers, quick and fierce as if rehearsed. On the left, the reaction was different, folded arms, narrowed eyes, a low murmur of disapproval. The temperature in the room shifted. It was no longer just a debate, it was a fight for the crowd's allegiance. And the first blow had been thrown. The scrape of Bongino's chair against the polished floor cut through the air like a blade, sharp and jarring. In one quick motion, he was on his feet, towering over the desk, the stage lights catching the sharp lines of his suit. His sudden rise sent a ripple through the crowd, some leaning forward, others stiffening in their seats. He pointed hard and deliberate, his index finger slicing through the air toward Jasmine. His voice came out fast-clipped and loaded with force. "This," he barked, "is exactly what's wrong with our system. Anti-law enforcement, soft on crime, and proud of it." Each phrase was punctuated by a jab of his finger, as if he were trying to nail the words into the desk itself. He didn't pause to breathe. The rhythm of his speech quickened, the volume rising with every sentence until it felt less like talking and more like pounding. "You stand with criminals over cops. You put feelings over safety." The words hit like hammer blows, designed not to invite discussion, but to overwhelm it. The key phrases, anti-law enforcement, soft on crime, rang out again and again, echoing against the walls. They weren't just words, they were triggers, loaded to spark instant reactions from the audience. On the right side of the room, a wave of applause and shouts rose up, sharp and aggressive, like a squad rallying behind its commander. On the left, the reaction was colder, folded arms, narrowed eyes, lips pressed tight. A low murmur rolled through their side of the audience, a sound not of confusion, but of restrained anger. The space between Bongino and Jasmine seemed to shrink. He leaned forward, shoulders squared, voice booming so loud it seemed to push the air toward her. The cameras caught it all, the flex of his jaw, the glint in his eye, the way his chest heaved with each word. This was no longer about making a point. It was about creating pressure, psychological, physical, in public. Bongino wasn't just speaking to Jasmine, he was performing for the cameras, for the millions watching at home, and for the fraction of the audience in front of him that would cheer at every punchline. He pressed on, not giving her a single second to cut in. He wanted her on the defensive, wanted to control the tempo so completely that when she finally spoke, it would be from a position of reaction, not command. The message in his body language was clear: I'm in control here. But control in a room like this can vanish in an instant. Through the storm of words and the pounding rhythm of Bongino's voice, Jasmine never moved. She sat upright, her back straight against the chair, hands resting lightly on the desk, as if the chaos around her belonged to another world. Her eyes didn't flinch. They stayed locked on him, not with anger, not with fear, but with a steady, almost surgical focus. Each time he jabbed a finger in her direction, her gaze followed the motion calmly, as if she were watching a wave crash against a rock she knew would not break. She didn't interrupt. Not once. She let the silence between his sentences stretch just long enough to remind everyone that she wasn't losing control. She was choosing patience. Every second she waited was a second Bongino burned through his own energy, his voice climbing higher, his words rushing faster, like a fire feeding on its last dry branches. The audience began to feel it too. The more he spoke, the more his attacks felt like noise against her stillness. People on both sides of the room started glancing between them, sensing a shift, realizing that the power in the room was quietly sliding toward the one who hadn't said a single word. Jasmine's breathing was slow and deliberate, the kind that keeps the pulse steady under pressure. Her fingers tapped once against the desk, not nervously, but as if marking time, waiting for the exact moment to turn the tide. And when that moment came, it would not be loud. It would be decisive. For the first time since the segment began, Jasmine moved. Slowly, deliberately. Her right hand slid beneath the desk and came back holding a large sealed manila envelope. Across the front in bold, unmistakable red letters were the words, FBI Confidential. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The act alone was louder than anything Bongino had just shouted. The cameras caught the moment instantly, one lens pulling in tight, filling the screen with the sharp contrast of red ink against the pale yellow envelope. The audience's murmurs died down as if someone had turned down the volume on the entire room. Jasmine placed the envelope on the desk, her fingertips resting lightly on its surface, not opening it, yet letting the weight of its presence settle into the air. Her eyes never left Bongino's face, and for the first time all night he blinked. Seconds stretched. The studio lights seemed hotter, the silence heavier. You could hear the faint whir of the camera motors as they zoomed closer, and somewhere in the back row a chair creaked as someone shifted uncomfortably. Then, with the care of someone handling glass, Jasmine began to break the seal. Not fast, not slow, just enough to keep the audience leaning forward, waiting. And waiting, and waiting. The shift was subtle at first, a flicker in his expression, a faint tightening at the corners of his mouth. The confident smirk that had carried him through the opening minutes of the debate was gone, replaced by something harder to name. Not fear, not yet, but doubt. His eyes, which had been locked on hers with unbroken intensity, wavered for the first time. Just for a heartbeat, they darted down toward the envelope, then back up again as if looking away made him weaker, but looking at it made him uneasy. Around them, the energy in the room changed. The applause and cheers from his side had stopped completely. The murmurs from the other side grew quieter until the studio was caught in a strange, expectant stillness. Every person in the audience, supporters, critics, and those just here for the spectacle, was united in a single thought. What's in that envelope? Bongino shifted in his seat, a small movement, but one the cameras caught. His shoulders, once squared and rigid, slumped ever so slightly. The heat of the lights seemed to press harder on him now, the air thicker. He ran his tongue over his lips, an unconscious tell that the pressure was starting to seep in. Jasmine didn't move. She let him sit in that silence, in that tension, in that dawning realization that the balance of power was no longer his to hold. Without a word, Jasmine reached for the small remote in front of her and pressed a single button. The massive LED screen behind the moderator flickered to life. At first, it was just static in a black frame. Then the image sharpened, a close-up of a man in his late 50s, wearing a dark suit, the background a plain FBI briefing room wall. His face was lined, his voice steady, but edged with the weight of what he was about to say. My name is Special Agent Daniel Reeves. I served with the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 24 years. He paused, his gaze locked straight into the camera. I am here to testify under oath that Dan Bongino knowingly intervened in an internal investigation to shield a police officer found guilty of excessive force. The room went still. Not quieter still, the kind of stillness where even breathing feels too loud. Reeves continued every syllable deliberate. In 2015, while serving as a liaison to law enforcement agencies, Mr. Bongino exerted pressure on investigators to close the case without charges. This decision not only violated FBI protocol, it denied justice to the victim. The testimony rolled on the man's voice, filling every corner of the studio. There were no interruptions, no whispers, no shuffling feet, only the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Bongino sat frozen, his jaw, tight eyes fixed on the screen, but not truly seeing it. For the first time all night, the spotlight wasn't on his performance, it was on his past. The moment Reeves' final words faded, the room seemed to exhale all at once. But it wasn't relief, it was a sharp, uneven breath of people who had just witnessed something they didn't expect. On the left side of the audience, a few people exchanged wide-eyed glances, their hands covering their mouths. A woman in the third row slowly shook her head in disbelief. Somewhere near the back, a man leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression caught between shock and grim satisfaction. Others reacted differently, slow, deliberate nods. The kind of nods that said, "I've suspected this all along." A murmur ran through that side of the room, low but charged like the rumble of thunder, still far away but moving closer. The camera cut back to Bongino. He was trying desperately to hold his composure. His jaw worked silently, the muscles along his cheek tight as stone. His eyes stayed on the desk in front of him for just a fraction too long before darting back up, forcing an expression of defiance that didn't quite land. The studio lights caught the faint sheen of sweat along his temple. It was subtle, almost invisible to the audience in the room, but in high definition, beamed to millions watching at home, it was undeniable. This was not the look of a man in control anymore. Bongino cleared his throat, leaning toward the microphone. His voice was steady at first, but not the kind of steady that comes from control. It was the forced steadiness of someone trying to hold a cracked wall together. This is fabricated, he said, the pause between words betraying the strain. A political stunt, nothing more. But the words didn't land the way they used to. They didn't draw cheers or applause or the energizing hum of approval from his side of the audience. Instead, there was a muted rustle, people shifting in their seats, eyes darting toward each other, as if silently asking, "Do we believe this?" Bongino's hand brushed the papers in front of him, a small, restless motion. You can take any so-called testimony and twist it to fit a narrative. He added his voice, catching slightly on the word testimony. The microphones picked it up crisp and clear, sending that faint tremor out to every television in America. He forced a smirk, but it didn't reach his eyes. And when the camera cut to the crowd, the shot told the truth his words couldn't hide. Half the faces were impassive, and the other half wore the quiet expression of people who had already made up their minds, and it wasn't in his favor. Jasmine leaned forward for the first time all night, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of someone who had earned the right to speak. "You talk about law and order? Mr. Bongino," she began, her eyes steady on him, "but I live it, every day." She placed a single sheet of paper on the desk in front of her, a list. "These are the names of cases I have taken on in defense of civil rights. People wrongfully accused, families torn apart, lives restored." Her voice did not rise, it didn't have to. Then she told one story. Marcus Hill, Vietnam veteran, decorated. Nearly 50 years after serving his country, he was arrested for a crime he didn't commit, beaten in custody, denied a lawyer. His record, his reputation, his life almost destroyed. "I stood with him. I fought for him. And today, Marcus Hill is a free man with his honor restored because justice still matters to some of us." The words landed with the force of truth. The audience was silent for a heartbeat. Then chairs scraped back, people rose to their feet. Applause erupted, sharp and sustained, echoing through the studio until it drowned out everything else. Jasmine didn't smile. She simply sat back, letting the sound of the crowd carry the moment. Bongino beside her sat motionless, his eyes fixed downward, because in that moment there was nothing left to say. The applause faded slowly like waves pulling back from the shore, and when it was gone, there was only silence. Bongino didn't speak. He didn't even look up. His hands rested flat on the desk, his eyes fixed somewhere on the polished surface, as if by staring hard enough he could will himself out of this moment. The director in the control room made a choice. On the broadcast feed, the screen split in two. On the left, Jasmine Crockett, calm, composed, her posture straight and unshaken, the faintest trace of resolve still burning in her eyes. On the right, Dan Bongino's shoulders slightly hunched, the confidence that had carried him into the studio now nowhere to be found. It was more than a visual contrast, it was a verdict, and millions of viewers at home could see it without a single word being spoken. For a full 7 seconds, neither side of the split screen moved. No one filled the air with noise. No one rushed to the next question. In that silence, reputations shifted. In that silence, the power in the room changed hands. And in that silence, history was written. It took less than an hour. A 47-second clip from the hearing, just the final moments, the silence in the split-screen image hit social media like a lightning strike. The title was simple, brutal, and impossible to scroll past. Jasmine silences Bongino. On Twitter, it was everywhere within minutes. Verified accounts, journalists, activists, even celebrities who had never commented on politics before were sharing it. On Facebook, the clip was racking up hundreds of thousands of shares before the West Coast had even finished breakfast. TikTok users added captions, slow-motion replays, and dramatic background music. YouTube thumbnails showed Bongino's frozen face next to Jasmine's calm stare. In every corner of the internet, the message was the same: the truth doesn't need to shout. By the end of the day, the clip had passed 15 million views, and more importantly, it had shifted the conversation. This wasn't just a political exchange anymore. It was a moment, a cultural snapshot, and Jasmine Crockett was now the name on everyone's lips. Jasmine let the noise of the internet, the heat of the moment, fade into the background. She leaned into the microphone not to argue, not to boast, but to leave something behind. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Truth doesn't wear a party color," she said, pausing just long enough for the words to settle. "It's either told or it's buried." For a heartbeat, the room stayed still, and then it happened. First, a few people rising to their feet, then more, until the entire studio audience was standing. Applause swelled like a rising tide, and in the front row, someone wiped away tears. Others followed. The cameras caught everything: the standing ovation, the faces wet with emotion, the mix of pride and gratitude in the crowd. It wasn't about sides anymore. It was about something everyone in that room recognized: the rare moment when someone spoke the truth without fear. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, didn't pump her fist, didn't bask in the attention. She simply stepped back from the microphone, letting the power of her words carry themselves into the history books. The applause had faded. The room was still. Jasmine's words hung in the air, unshaken, unchallenged. She glanced at the audience, then straight into the camera, her voice quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "When it's your turn, will you speak the truth?" She let the pause stretch just long enough to make it personal. "Or will you let it disappear into the dark?" The screen began to dim. The sound of the room faded to nothing, and as the picture dissolved into black, one image remained: an FBI confidential envelope lying under the glow of a single light, the edges curling in the heat, the seal unbroken. Then darkness. In life, the truth often walks in quietly, without banners, without a microphone, but it carries the power to shake entire rooms. Speaking up for what's right isn't about volume, it's about courage. The moment you choose to defend justice, even against overwhelming pressure, is the moment you shape the future for yourself and for those who come after you. If you believe the truth still matters, hit that subscribe button now. Join a community that stands for justice, exposes corruption, and never backs down. Your voice matters. Let's make it louder together.